The year was 2000 in United States. In 2000, 2001, there was a huge shift, a huge shakeup in the financial industry and in US and world economy. As some of you probably can recall, this was the year when the dot-com bubble blew up. I remember watching TV and watching commercial for this pet socket, and it was advertising pets.com. It was all the, I don't know if you have seen it as well. Welcome, John, to Speak Brave podcast.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you. Good day to you.
And so let me take you back to 2000. Now, this is a recording in 2020. And then in the middle of 2000, there was a lot of companies who were bleeding cash. They were bleeding resources because they thought there was a brave new world. How can we monetize technology, monetize services that brick and mortar companies were doing for centuries and for decades? So there was this company team that was on the verge of running out of money. So they had a big party in California, and the next morning at 5 a.m., they chartered a private plane, and a team of them, I think 3 or 4, have flew from Santa Barbara to Texas to meet with potential buyers of their fledgling enterprise. And when they walked into the room, they were intimidated. They were intimidated by the success of this market leader who was at the time the number one position in their industry. And they made an offer: buy us out for $50 million. The executive, the CEO of that company, had a little, well, not a little, according to the witnesses, a smirk right imprinted on the face, a little laugh. So the team had to walk out of the room, defeated, and fly back to California. The year was 2000. The team from California was the founders of Netflix, meeting with the head of Blockbuster. Right now, rewind 20 years later, the market cap for Netflix as of this morning is $214 billion. Blockbuster no longer exists,
Exactly.
except for one store in Oregon. So this is a story of renegades, people who just believed in their dreams and went for it. And also, you didn't know who, John, did you know that I was talking about Netflix?
No. I didn't even have the corporate executive in Texas figured out. I was in Texas. There's really only 2 names that have ever been at the top of my list of memorable. One from 3 decades ago by the name of H. Ross Perot, and the other, interestingly enough, currently very much a contemporary and a developer of ideas, Mark Cuban.
Yeah. So,
but no, I had no clue.
And that's the power of storytelling.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is something that a lot of, and you, John, we work together, right? We work together on many projects, with many different clients and a lot of different situations. And one of the things that people hire us and the company that I operate is because they want to be what? They want to be more confident in speaking, better communicators, and tell better stories. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree completely. And I've watched that process at work, and it is magical.
It is magical for everyone, right? For us as a facilitators, trainers, coaches, and also for our clients who get the results, which are incredible. So in this podcast with my friend John and co-producer, co-creator I'd like to talk about the art of magnetic storytelling. Storytelling is not something to be afraid of. It is something to study, embrace, and instill in your life.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people ask, well, what is a story? How do I know what stories to tell and when? Aren't you glad you're listening to us right now? Because we're going to answer those 3 questions. How does that sound, John?
Sounds fantastic. Folks, he means what he says, and I promise you he will deliver.
Thank you. So number 1, what are stories? And what are stories not? So let me just clear some misconceptions right away. Stories are not beginnings, middles, and ends. Stories are not anecdotes. Stories are not always about you. And stories are not pretend. Stories that go deep into the grooves of our brain, that go deep and seep into our subconscious and that unconscious brain that John is a master and expert that he shares with everyone, is that stories well told will go through the defenses, the resistance, and affect change.
Yeah.
But how can we learn to be a better storytellers? You have to tell. You have to tell stories. You cannot wish, you cannot think, you cannot move yourself to be a better storyteller if you don't practice. A lot of times when somebody approaches you and says, you know what, let me tell you a story, that tells me one of 2 things. Number 1, they don't have a better start, which is, a lot of professional communicators also suffer from this, or they're inexperienced or uncomfortable. Just start at the highest point. Start somewhere that you take us right into the middle of the action. When you say, let me tell you a story, what I have found, and based on my research, is that a lot of people have this unconscious resistance. Mm-hmm. Inside, they may be rolling their eyes. Oh my gosh, not another story. No! So you don't even tell them it's a story. You just go right into it. Never apologize for bringing your stories. Never ask for permission. Well, you can if you are gracious, but do it in a way that it doesn't say that it's a story. So what do you think so far, John?
Well, first of all, this is the first time I've actually heard it said that you don't need to open up with, I'm going to tell you a story, but rather to open up and actually just make the entire presentation. And you actually did perform that at the beginning of this podcast, because you started the story immediately by saying it was the year 2000. Okay, interesting. Where's this going? That right there was a capturing mechanism. So I see why that is so effective, because you throw up the opportunity for resistance when you say, I want to tell you a story. And instead of saying, I want to, you just seize the opportunity and start the story. So that's lesson number 1 for me. And that is an epiphany. Thank you.
Absolutely. Remember, as a communicator, as somebody who has a message, we have to have fluidity in our approach and a toolbox that is ever evolving and expanding. John, you and I are always talking about someone I admire in our industry, right? In my life, Tony Robbins.
Yes.
Tony Robbins, I recently watched an interview of him in his documentary on Netflix called I Am Not Your Guru. And I looked up, and he is speaking for like what, 30 years? 35 years?
Every bit of it.
At least.
Every bit of it.
And he told a story that an interviewer was asking, how did you get started? How did you get started into this life, into this mission? And Tony Robbins said when he was in school, I think perhaps was high school, he joined a debate team or a communication class. And there was a girl that he liked. So he was really acting up, and he took control of the entire class. And his teacher asked him to stay after the class one day and said, Tony, I know you. And Tony is like looking at the teacher's like, what? Why did you ask me to stay after class? I'm just here after this girl I like. And he said, no. I know who you are. You are not just a speaker. You are a communicator. And he gave him a poem or story about, it's called The Will to Win.
Yeah.
And Tony started crying when he read it because it spoke to him so deeply. And after that period, he entered one contest, another contest, regional, state, that he won every time first place. And that's when he knew that he has a gift to communicate and create messages that move people.
Yeah.
I looked up his, according to Forbes magazine, his net worth is about $400 million.
Mm-hmm.
His speaking fee outside of his events is $300,000 and up per appearance.
Yes.
And one of the writers said he may never had a regular job, but relied on speaking, the art of storytelling, messaging, connecting with people in a way that makes sense to convey his message. So my challenge to myself, to you, John, and to everyone who's listening, if you are considering yourself a professional communicator, a professional speaker, how are you investing in those tools? How often do you speak? How do you measure the effectiveness of your message? How do you change, adjust, and create objectives for every time you speak? Do you collect relevant, timely, compelling, interesting, change-worthy stories that you can insert in your message? Also, in that documentary for Tony Robbins, in one of his premier events, Date with Destiny, Unleash the Power Within and Others, he speaks for, well, perhaps on stage with other speakers, 10, 12 hours a day. Can you speak for 10, 12 hours a day? Perhaps.
Perhaps, but I've not been there before.
It takes, and also I have heard about a seminar called Landmark Education, where it's one speaker speaks for 3 days, full days, 8 to 10 hours a day. So it is possible. But specifically, the focus of this podcast is on storytelling.
Yes.
I briefly said what stories are not. So let's talk about how you can start telling better stories. And you have hit the nail on the head, John, when I said in the beginning, the year was 2000. First, you create a context or a place or a time where the story is going to take place. Next, create a challenge for your character or a group of characters. So it could be a challenge for you, or it could be a challenge for somebody who's in your story. Then, the most important part of any story is the conflict. How is that character going about and struggling, battling with this either villain or challenge? The longest part, or probably the most highly weight of every story, is the conflict. And final one is a resolution. So set the context, introduce the challenge, describe, show us viscerally the conflict, and bring forth the resolution.
Seems simple enough. And yet, it's easier said than done.
That's right. But the people who practice, and that's why I talk about Tony Robbins, and I also mentioned Demosthenes of Athens. Did I do that in the past?
In the past, you have, yes. You've talked to Demosthenes before.
And you know his story, right? Or I can tell you now.
Hmm. But you can tell again, because we have a lot of new listeners, and let them join in with those who have been following you and hear this story, because it's really a fascinating story.
Demosthenes, he became an orphan at an early age, and he had guardians who were taking care of him in ancient Greece, Athens. And over time, his family guardians have overtook his inheritance. So they have embezzled it and kept it for himself. So Demosthenes, young Demosthenes, was tasked to go to the Athenian court and argue in front of the public and whoever was the deciding body at the time how to get it back. But there was a big problem. He was weak in physical stature. He didn't have the skills of oratory, and he didn't know how to present himself. So he eventually became one of the greatest orators of ancient world. He was going up and down the hills in Athens and running and actually speaking his entire arguments and speech as he was running. So his wind, his endurance became so good, so he could speak for hours. We also know that he had a lisp or some kind of speech impediment at the time. So according to accounts and perhaps the legend, he put little rocks in his mouth so he could enunciate and articulate his words. And if that was not enough, he went in front of the sea and tried to speak over the waves to make sure his volume could reach the people in the entire auditorium. So it doesn't matter where you are starting as a communicator, storyteller. John and I would just share with you this framework, the stories of Demosthenes, Tony Robbins, and many, many others, that doesn't matter where you start, as long as you do, and you will become a better communicator. Right now, we are experiencing this health challenge, and there's so many demands on us to communicate with precision through video and in person. So I believe this probably is the golden age of communicators. And the reason I believe that is all the rules that we had to go in front of people and public, which probably will return soon or when it's safe to do so. But everyone has been given a second chance.
Exactly.
A clean slate, a cleanest slate possible, that if you have an internet connection and a computer or a phone, that you either, if you even don't have it, borrow one, and you can connect to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or just recording through Zoom, you can become an exceptional communicator right now. The reason for that is you are rewriting the rules. You can create stories, context that will resonate with your audience. And not only that, you have the immediate feedback of watching your own replay, so you can study the collection of your facial expressions in the moment, and also the sequence of your storytelling and your words.
Can I pop in here real quick? That last point is particularly, at least to me, and I think it should be to anyone listening who strives to be a better teller of stories. The idea of being able to observe yourself and to study yourself, and to do so not as such that you say, oh man, I'm terrible, I look awful, but rather to be objective and to say, ask yourself the question, how would that look to the people that are watching me? Because the interesting thing is that whether they're doing it telephonically, through video, or doing it in a live setting, the one thing that cannot be hidden is the expression on your face and the mannerisms that you project. So being able to study that, pinpoint where you need to improve, and if you're fortunate to have peers who serve as mentors, for example, in my situation, you serve as a mentor and not just as a peer, because you see and you give feedback. And that feedback includes, I think you would be better served by doing this rather than this. But the key is, it's a teaching opportunity. We are equipped, we're poised to create master communicators through so many technological means. And when there's a lot of people getting attention, being disruptive and chaotic and crazy and angry, there are so many communicators that have stories that can transform and change lives. The two people that you talked about in particular are individuals who have transformed lives. Demosthenes continues to transform lives through the writings of what he has done and through the quotes that they have taken down of the presentations and the speeches and the stories that he's told. And you can go on YouTube and find many free available videos of the handiwork of Tony Robbins. And I can tell you right now, spend 5 minutes watching Tony Robbins talk on camera, and you will be a fan for life. So
Absolutely. And the reason that I bring him up is that you may have been born with a gift, but it takes dedication. It takes sweat. It takes perspiration.
It's hard work.
It is work, because you want to be sure that, not just because you know how to speak, but also, I think, very important point, and we talked about this right in the beginning, that you can tell stories, and you must tell stories, and you must collect stories, and just as importantly, have to know what story to tell when. And if you just have one story, you may just connect with people on that one occasion, which is good. It's an invitation for further conversation. But you must continuously invest into collecting, sharpening, and improving your storytelling. One and done is no longer valid. It's never been valid. You have to have a repository. So when you see someone, when it's in the sales conversation, you have to have a story about handling price objections, about questions about return on investment, about people not trusting you or don't have enough trust yet. They may have hesitations of they're already working with someone. What is the story will you tell them? What about if there's a problem? Will you tell them about the problem so they can relate to you? Will you tell them a story about where you came from, and maybe why did you end up doing what you're doing? How about the company you founded? How about the product that was invented that you are selling? You have to have a story for every occasion. And if you don't, you will miss out. And people who do, they will move the conversation further, create better relationships, and close the sale if it's you and salesperson, or will be much further along if you just have one story. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. I immediately see something else that jumps out at me. When I first began my journey to better understand communicating, Mark, you and I would go to meetings of organizations that are dedicated to helping people be better communicators of whatever it is the message that they're trying to convey. And they talked about the term niche. The niche being, what is that thing that you do best? What is that statement of purpose? What is that mission, purpose, and vision? What is it that you will do? What is your speech, your story going to do for me? What are you going to tell your customers? What are you going to give to your customers? And yet, stories don't have to be necessarily, can I say, pigeonholed into this one particular niche, but rather stories can be modified to complement the niche. Would that be a correct statement?
Absolutely. And I think this is where the training of you as a communicator has to be ongoing. You have to always research about your audience. You have to
Mm-hmm.
research about I mean, this is what it is. That's why I think that's what makes Tony Robbins so remarkable, and also Ronald Reagan, right? The great communicator. He can tell you a story. Or perhaps many other storytellers and communicators from the past. They knew what story to tell, or at least intuitively, or maybe, or Martin Luther King Jr., right? So if you just have one story or two, it's no longer efficient, no longer enough. Understand how, and also that's why we're doing the podcast. And I know, John, you are interviewing luminaries and experts in your field. So if you say, or somebody who's listening, oh, I don't have any stories to tell for my clients or my prospects or my past clients, reach out to them and interview them on podcast. Write a story about them. Become a journalist that they never thought they needed and never would have otherwise. I can guarantee you that you may not always get the interview, but you will pique the interest of your guest when you say, I would like to write a story about you for my blog, maybe for my presentation or for my podcast. And people love stories about themselves. And if you do a good job writing, it doesn't have to be long, maybe 1 or 2 pages, or interviewing, and then you give it to them, say, there you go, put it on your social media, on your LinkedIn, part of your recommendation. People will be more open to share the stories that you are collecting, whether about failure, overcoming objections, overcoming lack of vision, creating a new market niche. You have to ask and collect stories and have a story file. I have a story file on my computer and on my notebook, and I use those stories in my presentations, as you know, and also when I'm speaking with people, either for the first time or for 100th time, right? If you don't have stories to tell, and we know this, John, that if I give you a list right now of 6 things, how about this? I'd like to tell you this, this interesting information that I came across recently, that we as people sometimes doubt ourselves, and we doubt our own ability, and we also discount our gifts because we are so close to them and we think that everyone else should have them. So did you hear my message, what I just said?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And the first thing I would say is that's a true statement with regard to me. I have been there. I have had that doubt. I have questioned whether I have anything useful to offer. And I have hesitated and in many cases failed to take an opportunity because I talked myself out of it.
And also there's this another very pernicious and very malicious trait that I've seen in myself and in others that takes away from a quality of life, where we try to fit in and we discount our own gifts. So this is just this is one of those things that we can talk about and share. I would like to tell you a quick fable. Would you be open to that?
Yes, I would.
Okay. John, it was such a dark night that we could see all of the stars. And then this dark night became into a dark storm. And the storm was blowing the wind so strong that there was a eagle's nest on the top of the tree. And the wind blew a young eaglet out of the nest. And the eaglet was falling down, all the way from the tree, from the mountain, all the way down to the ground. Eaglet fell, but he survived. And then the next morning, he opened his eyes and started looking around. And all around him, he saw a circle of curious chickens looking at the eaglet. And the eaglet fell in love with the chickens. He loved them so much. He wanted to go and find worms and chase butterflies and swim in a little bucket with water. And there was a chicken coop. He found himself a nice little nest. And all that the eaglet wanted is to fit in. He really wanted to be accepted by this tribe of chickens. But there was a big problem, John. The eaglet was becoming an eagle. And he started to grow marvelous, this amazing wings. But he didn't want the wings. He wanted to be just like the chicken. So the eagle decided to cut his own wings.
Ooh.
And he was cutting them every day. But the wings were still growing and reminded him that this is the wings of an eagle. So he cut them and then he plucked the feathers until there was no more wings. Sometime after, two beautiful eagles flew over the area where the chicken coop was. And they looked down and they saw, is that an eagle down there? So they swooped down to the ground and started talking to an eagle. Brother, join us. Let's fly over the mountains that can kiss the sky. We're going to fly over the lakes that shimmer and reflect the light from 1,000 suns. And we'll fly in the night where we'll see all the beautiful stars and we'll learn the meaning of life itself. The eagle saw the eagles and he started running and tried to lift off and lift off and lift off. And he tried and he tried and tried, but he couldn't. His wings were gone. And all he did, just saw his brothers disappear in the ocean of clouds. And all he could do is turn around and walk back to the chicken coop because it was time for his meal. That's the reason I tell you the story, is that you can tell so much with a story versus a list.
You don't even have to ask the storyteller for a moral. The moral is self-evident. Isn't that incredible? That's the magic of storytelling from where I sit as the listener. If that doesn't capture someone and shift their thinking, then what would?
Everyone is empowered to tell stories and should invest in their own storytelling ability as a communicator of value. And it doesn't matter where you start. It matters that you do. They could be fables. They could be stories from your own life or stories from the world around you. I can tell stories from your life, John, with your permission, of course. And change, and perhaps changing a few things for privacy. But it doesn't matter where you start. Start telling stories now. Start collecting the right stories so you can tell the right stories at the right time in front of the right audience so you can achieve the right message for you.
I've not been checking time, but how are we on time? Because I have a question for you, but I don't want to take you past your normal time frame here as you share this incredible information with us and walk us through something that can be very much life-changing.
Well, I think we will conclude with the content, but I'm open to your question and then we'll finish up.
I want to ask you, as a coach, as a mentor, as a trainer, as a guide, as a person who really eagerly desires to cast a vision a mission and a purpose into the lives of individuals who are hungry for success and want to use storytelling as a major valuable asset in their success. What about individuals that you encounter who seem to be very self-absorbed, and all they tend to do is talk about themselves? That's a problem that I had for years. I wanted recognition. I wanted to be seen and accepted in the collectives of people that I thought would raise my stock as a human being and as an associate and a peer. And it took me a very long time to arrive at the point that I'm already special because of my individuality, but I don't have to force my story down people's throats. And yet there are people who are very, for want of a better term, self-absorbed. And I'd like to hear, if not today, in the next session, how do you find your way into that person to help them, as I said before, shift their thinking away from the inner and begin to think about how they can cast out a larger net to bring more people into the message by changing the story?
I can answer it in a very concise way now, and we can talk about it in the future episodes. Thank you, John, for bringing this. Number one question I ask, and you've seen this, John. You've seen this. You've seen me do this with my clients and without clients in the past over the last several years. Number one question: what is the objective? What is the objective of this communication? And don't just tell me what the objective is. Take a pen. I don't have a pen with me, but there's a pen and a paper, and write it down on a piece of paper, on your computer, on the whiteboard. Take a pen or a pencil, whatever it is, or marker, or dry erase marker, and write down the exact, precise objective of your message. Once you tell me this, then we can go from there. Everyone has their own strength. So my responsibility as a coach, consultant, and a perceptive trainer is to amplify those strengths that only you can deliver at the highest level. And the similar question is, what is the objective? And if this objective does not serve you as a communicator, then we have to look at different options. How can we bring out that vulnerability, authenticity, and the language of your intended audience in a way that helps you achieve your objective? There's different things that people expect, and there's different sequences that people would like to hear in their messages. So as a guide, I ask you this: what is the objective?
The other question that I'd like you to address in another setting, hopefully the next one, is how to better identify the demographic, the personality, the traits of the audience, and be able to better transform that communication into effectively reaching that group. Because as a communicator, one of the things that I strive and want to do is to become more intergenerational in my ability to communicate. I don't want to be, as I said earlier, pigeonholed into one specific audience. I'd like to be able to customize and package my message to reach a broad audience based upon specificity of that particular demographic at the time.
Sure.
So that's something I'd love to hear more about.
I would love to bring this, and I do have something to share about this because this is part of my expertise, and you know this, John, and I work with clients on this and help them. So I do enjoy this work, and I'm happy that everyone has joined us. So tune in next time, or the next episode in this series, where John and I will talk about how to make your message sticky, irresistible to your target audience, so they will find you amazingly relevant, that you're speaking directly into their soul, into their heart. And there is ways to do this, and there's ways to measure it and construct your message. So please tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe, share, like this episode and this podcast with everyone you care about. I appreciate you for spending time with John and I. I hope you were entertained, inspired, and perhaps moved to think differently about your messaging and storytelling. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, John. And
Thank you, Mark.
and I will meet you next time.